was wondering when you were mentioning the repertoire of of this concert with the youth orchestra, Berg, Strauss, and Mahler, about the idea of a German repertoire that is contrasting to a French repertoire in terms of dynamics, articulations, the rhetoric, to build up a real good orchestra. Nowadays, you have to at least have performed several of these trends, let's say, and this is quite a challenge for the musicians, because they really have to think differently, and not only the conductor but the musicians. They have to know it, the repertoire, the chamber music connected to this orchestral repertoire, and it takes time. You've mentioned how difficult it is here in Brazil, because only in 2 years, in 3 years, it's impossible to build up this. So it's quite a challenge to talk about artistic project when it has a term, a limit of 3 years or 4 years. So this is also something that is very different, as you mentioned, from the American experience and the European orchestral experiences, because it takes time, and we don't have this here. Of course, if I give time to somebody, it will help, but it might not be enough to do all this repertoire in a very responsible way. Supposing that we have this time, and I would say, Ira, you have 10 years to build up the orchestra. Do you believe that there are trends? You have to play German music, as you said, Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, in terms of the quartets, and then later you have to start with Debussy and
well, yeah, I know what you're saying. Look, different stylistic things. I was just talking about the singers. It's the same thing with the singers here. You know, like, not all of them. There's also a new generation which are a little beyond that. But in the past, one of my first years, everyone was sounding like Puccini, no matter what they were singing. No, there's a big difference whether you're singing Mozart or Puccini or Verdi or whatever, or even a Verismo and Verdi. It's different worlds. And the same thing with instrumentalists. And you know, we have, for instance, the historically informed performances or early music or whatever you want to call all of that, which I think is a great thing, but I have also my critique of it as well.
But it changed our way of listening to early music.
No, that's what I think is great about it. Okay, but there's also no generic way of playing that type of music either. There's a big difference in sound and string technique between playing a Bach cantate and a Handel oratorio, or a Hameau opera, is done here. It's a completely different study, you know, and that you can apply to almost any epic, you know. If you're only playing, I mean, I can apply the same thing to every epic and every style. If you're playing a Brahms piano quartet, you know, with a typically kind of richer, I would say thicker, but it shouldn't be thick, but, you know, Brahmsian sound. But the second half, you're playing the Saint-Saëns piano quartet, or Fauré, which I adore. So the second quartet, the Fauré, you know, and you play it like Brahms. Ciao. You know, ciao. If you're playing a string quartet of Brahms, or even Schubert, and then you turn to the quartets of Debussy or Ravel, and play the same way, ciao. You can. So I would lay it a little bit at your doorstep as head of a school, as an organization, as an educator as well, and the conductors and teachers there to prepare them for that, to do exactly that, make it a mandatory part of the program, that you have to, for instance, prepare, strings should prepare, let's say a Haydn quartet, because that's basic. That's like mother milk.
The fundamentals of
a Haydn quartet, maybe a Beethoven, a Brahms, something like that, and then the Ravel introduction or Allegro for harp, or Debussy, something like that, or the Debussy or Ravel quartets, or if a piano trio is playing Brahms, then have them also play the Ravel, or Fauré, Opus 121, piano trio Fauré, or Sanson. I mean, there are marvelous chamber works of Sanson, and also to get away from this idea that it's only German music that counts. I mean, the 3 Bs and all of that. Yeah, I mean, of course, 3 of the greatest masters in history. There's no question. But there are a lot of other composers who were great, really geniuses who wrote a lot of music, which is not played a lot because I remember even at Curtis, there was a little bit of that. When we would bring in like the Franck Quartet and Felix Gallen would say, "Oh, that's kind of music, that's not music." Oh, come on, Felix. And I would, but this idea that only German music, yes, I mean, the high points of quartet literature, for instance, are Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven. But later, Bartók,
Bartók, yes, I would say him.
I mean, I was just listening the other day, marvelous quartet, one of my favorite modern string quartets, Du Tuyeux.
Yeah,
marvelous.
He has wonderful orchestral pieces also.
Yeah, Metabolis, and the symphonies. So I mean, give your quartet, whatever teacher is there, or the director of the school, or whatever who's responsible for the curriculum. Okay, so this quartet this year will be assigned Haydn Opus 76, number 2, and Du Tuyeux. And the other quartet will do whatever, Beethoven Opus 59, number 1, and the Fauré quartet, or the Debussy. And the other one will do that. And the winds will do, one group will do the Mozart C minor serenade, and the other group will do whatever, Ligeti, or the Schoenberg Wind Quintet, or God knows what, or Pura Lunaire, or work like that. I mean, we can go on for the next 8 hours along it, but the point was made. And that should, in my opinion, be part of the standard repertoire, the standard curriculum.
Okay.
So when then these players are then confronted with the stylistic difference between a Brahms symphony and La Mer, or a Russian work, I mean, you don't play Tchaikovsky with the same sound that you play Brahms with, and you don't play Tchaikovsky with the same sound you play Stravinsky with.
Yeah.
So you can give them like Stravinsky and Tchaikovsky, or there are different phases of Stravinsky. So one thing if you're playing an early work of Stravinsky, or if you're doing Agon. All right. So I mean, I think this should be your, you guys who run these organizations and the faculty, conductors, whatever, to decide that early on. We are going to make that the mandatory part of the program, because bringing people to just practice their instruments for me is the most, I will say it now, an asinine thing. No, you want to, of course, master an instrument, right?
Yeah.
But why do we master an instrument? What is that, the the end in itself? So you can play the Sibelius concerto or the whatever faster than so. No, mastering an instrument is so that you can make music. And making music is a very huge subject. So mastering an instrument, I mean, I can play very fast, I can play very loud, but that's different than controlling a Bach fugue at the piano with 4 different voices, or some of my transcriptions where I ask the pianist to play 3 different voices in one hand. Like, Horowitz used to say, and he even told me, I met him too, he said, technique is not playing fast. Technique is color control. You know, technique, playing the opening of some certain Schubert sonatas is as difficult as playing Prokofiev 7 sonata, in a way more difficult. You know, so this thing about, oh, I have to master my instrument or my teacher will get angry and the teacher will want to kill me when I say this. No, yes, you have to master your instrument, but you're mastering your instrument for a higher purpose. You're mastering your instrument to master the music that was written for, and not just virtuoso pieces, and not just excerpts from Mahler symphonies or concertos. So when you sit down to play, you're not thinking about your instrument anymore. Same thing for conductors. I'm going to give a talk later today about conducting, and I'm going to basically, like, I don't know, go on the warpath. Conducting, the least important and least difficult and least interesting thing about conducting is learning how to beat. No conductor of the past, I mean, they observed conductors, but they didn't go to a school. There weren't schools for conducting, you know. Now you see today this kind of generic, everyone conducts and everything is clean and there's no content in many cases. Who do we still listen to? These conductors from the past, the recordings, who wouldn't pass the first stage of a competition today, but they had it here and they had it here. You know, the easiest thing about conducting is conducting. Strauss used to say that. You want to learn conducting? 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Pronto. The rest takes you 40 years to learn. You know? And Max Rudolph, one time, this famous book that Max Rudolph wrote, you know, The Grammar of Conducting. I would apply this to instrumentalists too. So, I mean, I worked with the man, you know, my teacher wrote that book. Okay. So we would study Max's book, of course. And then Max was invited back to the Philadelphia Orchestra for a program. And in Haydn Symphony and Roussel, it's another composer one could look at. Suite in F, and then Brahms' second, till Eulenspiegel as well. And we went to the rehearsals, and occasionally he would get up and demonstrate in front of the orchestra at Curtis as well, when we would have our assignments. First piece I ever conducted was the Dvorak Serenade for Strings, very first. But, and then he would get up there, and we would look at him, watch him, and look at each other, and then, but Maestro, you're not, rather timidly we would say, Maestro, you're not following your book. And he said, oh, but when I conduct, I make music. What? You know, we just spent 3 months studying your book with all the diagrams of how to conduct and this, and he got up there and was doing this, and you want to know something? I feel that at this point, I'm 61 now, I've been conducting for 36 years. I know what now that if I get out there and basically do this in a certain way in my head, I'll get the sound I want. It's nothing to do with beat and hold your baton like that. No. So the same thing with an instrumentalist. Yes, master your instrument, but parallel to that, you know, study these things. So I would really make that a necessity of every curriculum, and as well as a potential career choice. Now, you know, form a group, get together, have rap sessions. You know, I mean, in the past, that's what people did, non-professionals. You know, people didn't have recordings. Or Antal Dorati, the great Hungarian conductor, talked about when he was a child in Budapest, and his family would sit down in the evenings and they went through all the Haydn string quartets, the family, the brothers, the father, whoever, sisters, each playing one of the instruments, and went through all the quartets and all the, you know, that's something that, of course, he became a professional, but I mean, that was common back then. So I think there should be at least room made for that as well in every institution in the world. So these musicians are aware of stylistic things. And even if you have an early music department, make it very clear, early music doesn't only mean being played on a remake of some Baroque instrument or, I just went through all the Bach cantatas the last 2 months, all kinds of instruments that we don't really have today, corno de caccia and things like that. These are instruments, some of them only existed around the area in which Bach lived. You have completely different instruments that Hameau was using or composers in Italy. It doesn't mean that everything Baroque is just played this way and with the old bow. No. So even in the early music department, there should be a clear difference made between playing French music from that period, playing Hebel or whoever, Hameau or Lully, and playing Bach. Mm-hmm. And you don't play Handel oratorio written in or opera written in 1727 with the same articulation that you play the Matthew Passion, which was also written, in that time. There's two different worlds. So, and those are things I think have to start in school, because if the kids don't have their own interest just to do that by themselves, which I think they should have, but you can't force someone to be curious. But then you have to create the environment for them to at least start thinking in that direction. And then when they play in an orchestra, it's a different story.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
Listen, you've mentioned a little bit about your thoughts about the future, the near future, and how challenge it is for us in our sector to be relevant in a situation where we cannot meet, we cannot be close to others. That's exactly what musicians do. But you also mention it as an opportunity for a change way of thinking about the repertoire, the way we play music for people to be more close to the audiences. What you've been thinking through the last weeks about this moment, and what are the positive? I don't like to talk about the negative things because this is already a very challenged thing, but there are very positive things that might be possible in the future. Could you tell us a little bit about this?
Well, I think that many organizations, as we talked about before the virus, were in such a deplorable state. Even some of our major institutions here in Brazil, the strongest ones, were being faced with existential problems. We talked about that. I've talked to all the directors of these places, huge cuts, this and that. There were threats last year to do so. It's not a new story. I think that one has to, this is a kind of a unique situation, because I can't think of another situation where people were actually forbidden to perform. I think opera continued even during the 1918 pandemic and other situations like that to an extent. But I think that things need to be, I think there has to be a historical perspective. We perhaps have a tendency to sugarcoat the past. Mm-hmm. And in some cases that's correct. I do think there was a golden era where everything converged. Bunches of genius composers all producing works up until the mid 20th century. What a bunch of riches to choose from. Depending whatever direction you went in. You do the latest premiere of Bartok or Schoenberg or Vaughan Williams or Sabay, whoever was still writing in the 1920s, 1930s. Britain, dozens of others. And then there came this divide between the composers and the audience, and the standard repertoire.
After the Second World War.
Yeah,
Yes.
which didn't exist before. All right. But there were always periods during which things had to be rethought. Handel certainly had to. Bach certainly had to. Bach wrote for the forces he had, as did Mozart. If Mozart had 4 violins in the first violin section, he had 4 violins. So they did the premiere of Don Giovanni in the theater in Prague with 4 first violins. So maybe have some historically informed people say, oh, we have to do it today with 4 violins. Yeah, but it's a tiny theater, not a hall of 2,000 or 4,000. But he also did the Paris Symphony with 40 violins, which if you did a Mozart Symphony today with 40 violins, sacrilegio, and all right. So I think it's important to realize that most of the great composers deal with the exigencies that they were confronted with. Mm-hmm. And we have to do the same now. We have to adapt. There will be certain victims. We talked before about Mahler and, certainly opera. I think major opera for the time being, unless there's a vaccine developed or some kind of miracle takes place, which we all hope, because I would really, the thought of not doing opera anymore would make me very sad. I'm in addition to everything else, also an opera conductor, I would consider myself an opera conductor. And, not to mention the existential elements of opera houses, which basically exist to do that. Mm-hmm. So that's very scary. But I think we have to think now along really practical terms, what's possible. And I don't mean reductions, if someone calls me and says, we want to do a new production of Electra, can you play it on the piano? Sure, I'll do it on the piano, but no one really wants to go and hear an Electra with a piano or maybe a string quartet playing. We have to rethink repertoire. In a way, I think a theater like San Pedro and certain small organizations might have an easier time of it than major organizations, which rely on big publics, which rely on big, have large orchestras under contract, which have, a much larger infrastructure, and they have much larger costs, and a lot of those costs are paid for by the box office and all that. But I think I've read also articles about this, and certain small organizations are surviving and maybe even thriving. That's why I'm suggesting chamber music or thinking along those lines. I think we have to analyze each case, but I think it cannot be business as usual, and certainly not business as usual with organizations which were so decadent, I'm sorry to say, structurally, and we don't have to go into all the negative things, sort of also corruption and this and that. But sometimes a cleansing is necessary. There are certain. Boulez said, I don't believe that at all. But Boulez said 40 years ago or 50, burned the opera houses down. I don't agree with that at all. And he was quite a hypocrite, because then when he wanted to conduct the opera, then he was quite happy to have the opera houses there. And I consider Verdi and Wagner much more important than Boulez, despite all of his greatness. But you get my point. Sometimes things reach a point. It's like a divorce, which, or whatever the situation was. My personal situation with the child and all that, or leaving Brazil, or coming back to Brazil. Sometimes we're confronted with choices which are difficult, and it's a little bit of a jump into cold water, perhaps, not knowing exactly how it's going to work out. But I think we have to, and I'm not going to go into details of what I'm thinking about necessarily with you in this forum. We can continue that at some other time and with others. But things have to be rethought. Really, I think to be dreaming of the day when we can just get back and, you know, do 3-hour operas with 100 people in the chorus and do the biggest orchestra works, and no. I think for the time being, bar, you know, a miracle, it's not going to happen. I don't think. The Met just closed for the rest of the year. Okay, the Met's a house of 4,000, and they have, you know, certain needs. But I mean, you know, that's also the richest cultural organization in the world, and they just closed until December 31st. I mean, that's, you know, that's heavy.
It is.
That's heavy, and that's a heavy message to all of us. We can plan for 2021 and hope by that time, of course, we all want the same thing. But to survive as artists, and at the same time to have the institutions functioning as places of learning, I think we have to think along the lines that we've been discussing: different repertoire, broadening horizons of people, forgetting our own egos. It's not about our ego, or I want to be more famous or more successful or earning more than that. It's more. It has to be more about the, as they say in German, there's a very good phrase, die Sache an sich, the thing itself.
The thing itself.
The thing itself, you know. So I mean, that takes will take a lot of you know, in some cases, balls, you know, take some courage to come out and say the truth, which many people don't want to hear. But certain things cannot continue as they were, because they were not committed, they were not good. Everyone was in crisis, everyone crazy, and all of that. So I'm not going to sound like some new age healer either and say, oh, everything is going to be, you know, there's going to be a spiritual awakening. We're not necessarily seeing that yet in the world, but yeah, there has to be a rethinking, you know. So that's what I'm trying to do here with myself. And every time I talk or write something, I'm trying to give that message out, because, you know, I'm not an old man, but I'm at the age where I don't really care too much about, you know, if someone doesn't agree with me or whatever. I mean, you don't have to agree with me or my ideas, but I didn't really care. You know, I arrived at my conclusions, and I've been active as a musician now for, you know, 47, 48 years. So, I mean, I have a little bit of a gravitas behind me. And so I have my convictions. If I see that people don't want to do that and they just start dreaming about life as usual, business as usual, I think that's it's a lost opportunity. It's my opinion, you know. So I know that people like you are certainly thinking, you know, along those lines, and there's certainly many others that I know in the business. I got a call last week from a composer who wants an international project, wants me to coordinate it, and this and that. And, you know, people are trying to think about things, you know, whether they're practical or not, or feasible, and none of us really know what's going to develop politically or with our sponsors. You know, many of the sponsors will have suffered as well economically because of this disaster. Will they be so inclined to still support next year, you know, or the years after? Maybe, maybe not. But I think even there we have to present interesting ideas that perhaps depart a little bit from just, you know, give us please 2 million this year because we want to do whatever, Carmen for the zillionth time. No, you know, I love Carmen. But you know my point. It can't just be about that. And it can't just be about digital either. You know, digital's fine, and there's a lot of wonderful things about the digital world. We can have talks like this, but music making cannot be solely digital. Digital is more about your image than the music. and sometimes we need our image. You know, I've posted things and myself playing and other things, to reach more people, and we have recordings, all of that, but that's not the same thing as hearing music and making music live with other people. And I stress people, you know, there's a humanity involved, you know? So, I mean, I'm really not terribly interested. I have certain projects with some people going on about doing some unusual things, but only as a transitional idea. You know, once you do a project like that, it's okay, enough. So I'm not terribly interested in care too much about my image appearing. You know, I don't need to be, have more Facebook postings, and I do all that crap because I have to, but I'm not terribly interested, obviously, in that. I prefer to, you know, sit here and figure out how I want to phrase a Bach partita or something. Instead, that's what I'm about, not about, I have to, whatever.
Be under the spotlight.
Be in the spotlight. So but I think the digital aspect is important at this moment, but it can't be this the solution. We have to figure out ways to, you know, when this is all clear, how we can get back under which circumstances and work with those conditions, and perhaps more intelligently in the past, you know, and less limited. You know, that's my opinion, but c'est là.
It's always great to have you around us, and I think it's a privilege for me to be close to you and to have all this conversations, especially when we have to really think about things in a responsible way, because we take care of many things and people and programs, but mainly because there is a hope for change. And I think that as a composer, my life is about invention. So I think it is always about creating new worlds, not being satisfied with the one we are living in. So I think it is a great opportunity for change and transformation.
Well, I mean, we talk about the masters, but, you know, why do we have the Handel oratorios, for instance? It was an economic decision.
No, for sure.
Or Handel was going broke. He went broke several times with his opera seasons, and they couldn't afford to put on stage opera, so he turned to biblical subjects for the Protestant population of London, and with chorus, but which didn't have to be staged. So he saved, you know, and he what's the word? Adapted himself to the situation. You know, Bach, when he was at Köthen, was writing a different type of music than he was at Weimar. At Köthen, he was trying, you know, write the Brandenburg concertos and basically the first ideas for the well-tempered clavier and the English and French suites and so on. You know, he wrote a few cantatas, but basically not. And that's why we have those works, because he had those forces there. And then when he went to Leipzig, he had to write cantata. So he decided to provide, you know, like most cantata composers, church composers were, cantatas for the services. Our gain that such an unbelievable genius that all these masterpieces came out. But again, he was responding to what was needed. And when he got tired of that, he started writing for the coffee houses in Leipzig. And that's why we have this harpsichord concertos. And, you know, I mean, these geniuses were all responding to what they had, you know. But again, they were being creative. You know, Bach wasn't sitting around saying, "Oh, I can't perform," you know, the Schutz or whatever. They were not dealing with what was written even 50 years before them. They were creating, and we don't have that today. It's all the concentration on performing. But you know, I think it's good for people to have that in mind. You know, Haydn wrote smaller symphonies for this little room in Esterhazy that he was composing for up until about 1790. But then when he was invited to London, you know, he let go. And then he wrote these symphonies, which are absolutely the equal, also in terms of instrumentation of Beethoven, you know. But he wrote those for London, and he had huge orchestras. He had sometimes larger orchestras than we play Haydn Symphony today. So I mean, they adapted, and I think that's what we have to do. We have to be creative and not just be, again, like, you know, this is how I think, you know. But it's always a pleasure talking to you. And
it was great. I have to thank you for your time.